Welcome to the workshop on writing your family history, how to write a story with the characters God gave you. My name is Megan Ellis. I am currently a student at the University of Maryland Global Campus, working on my BA in English. I've just started a bookstagram on Instagram, and if you're here, that means you found me. I'm also a writer and have a few poems and short stories published, but you can find most of my work on my blog at meganacellis.wordpress.com. So some of my publishings are in our student magazine over at the College of Southern Maryland, and I've been in the Maryland Independent a few times. So that's where you can find some of my work again, or on the blog. This workshop is for the Right Women Book Fest. The Right Women is a book festival created specifically for women writers. The festival welcomes all literary organizations that are either women-run or women-inclusive. The festival is created to be diverse and welcoming to underrepresented groups. Any female and female-identifying artisans and crafters are also welcome so long as they work as hard as their work has to do with writing or books. You can find more information about the Right Women Book Fest at therightwomenbookfest.org or on their Instagram or Facebook pages. Right. Sorry, technical difficulties. I'm moving the wrong things around. All right, so this workshop did come with a worksheet that you can also get on the rightwomenbookfest.org website. If you click on this workshop, it looks like this. So I'll be reading off of this. You can also get this later. It's pretty explanatory, but we're going to be working on that today. So we're going to be working with how to write a story with the characters God gave you. How much do you really know about your family members? Where do you begin writing about these members? And how do you catalog random stories and events into one book? And finally, how do you write your novel? So today I'm going to tell you a story. This story is about my great-great-grandfather, Umberto Albert Filippo Vincoli. And the best way to start writing about someone else is you've got to treat them like a character. A lot of people always ask, well, how do I write a story about a family member without upsetting them or without, making it look like I'm telling lies? I find that you have to separate yourself from a lot of the family members and write them as a character. So the first step in writing your character is the easy stuff. What do they look like? Where did they come from? Their family, their parents. Then you want to dig into what they believe in, what their values are, what are their traditions, who did they love? Again, that goes back into their family members, and then of course later their spouses and their children and that. We'll be working on the character sheets. For each of the characters in your family, and I'm not just talking about your crazy eccentric Aunt Laura, who no one really talks to except at Christmas and Easter. You want to wow your reader with excitement, happiness, and conflict, but you have to know your characters and their stories before you can begin building your story. So the rules of writing these as a character, there really are no rules. With creative nonfiction, you kind of have a little bit of leeway to be creative as you want to, but also with memoir, you're writing your story. You're writing your truth. And so it may not be somebody else's truth, but it's the way you saw it and it's the way you feel. So that's the second rule, is your truth may not be their truth, but it is the truth or your truth. And then your third rule is be open and have fun. So in this case, my great-great-grandfather passed away before I was born. And so I don't know a lot about him, and there was no journals kept. So a lot of the time you just have to make stuff up, or as I learned yesterday, use words like it might have been and probably and it could have been. And you want to just try to capture their story as best as you can. So let's go back to Umberto and his story. So another thing is you want to pick a place in time for your story, because he lived an entire life. He was born, he was raised, he lived, and he died. So you can't just tell the whole story or your book would be this big. Same as with memoir, you have to pick a story or slim it down a little bit. So this story is going to start about the time Umberto was 43. And so you want to start with the basics, what you know about him, where he was born, when he was born, of course, his gender, nationality, whether or not he was educated, if he had an occupation as a teenager, or what his occupation was at this time. So in this case, Umberto was born in Colle Torto Molise, Italy, on March 21st, 1885. He is male, so his nationality is Italian, even though when he joined the military, he naturalized to a U.S. citizen, and then his occupation was a musician. So you can see him here in his military uniform. So this is where the genealogy work comes in, because again, I said I don't have any journals or any written things, but I was able to do some genealogy work back in 2016, and this is where the census comes in. So you have all your census records. So here I found out that he was 5 foot 6 inches, his eyes were blue, his hair color was brown, he was slender built, which you can also tell from some of his photos. He was Italian, yet he was fair-skinned. No piercings or tattoos or scars. And what people noticed first about him was his military uniform, or just like he would just wear like a basic pants and shirt. Now, some of that information I was able to glean from his children, who a lot of are in their late 80s and early 90s now. So then you want to move on to people. So people in the family, parents, siblings, friends, people they love, people they interacted with, especially at this time. So we're aiming towards the time he was 43. So I wouldn't tell you a lot about maybe somebody he knew in Italy, because by the time he was 43, he was in the military in the United States. But so these were, so this is a picture of his mother. This is Vincenzina Maesa Vincoli. And then his mother and father had the same name. His father was Vincenzo and his mother was Vincenzina, which in Italy is the exact same name. They're both basically translate to Victor, which is fun. And then his siblings, he was the eldest son, but he was the second oldest child. Margarita is actually his older sister. And then there was William, Rachelina, Helen, Arcangelo, and Plena. And then this is where the story gets fun. So Umberto married my grandmother, Mary, and they had 7 children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 children. And then him and Mary decided to divorce, and later that year she passed away. So because he was in the military, his children had to be placed in an orphanage, and he paid rent. Basically, he paid for the orphanage to take care of them, so food and bed. But as soon as he got married, the military told him, hey, you need to come pick up your children. You have a wife now. Excuse me for 1 second. Oliver was not having any fun. Which is my favorite story to tell about Umberto that I love, that he came home one day, or he told Charlotte he was going on a business trip, and she said, okay. And he came back home and he had 7 children in tow. And so they'd only been married a few weeks, and she now had 7 stepchildren, and she was 20 years younger than Umberto. So some of these stepchildren were rather close to her age. And luckily, she decided to stick by him, and they had 5 more children, 13 of which, math hurts, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 living to adulthood and 1 passing away as a young child. So now we know all this information about Umberto. We've got who he is on the outside, what he looks like, who his family members are. Now this is where you try to do everything else. Again, a lot of genealogy work helps with this. You can find like church records. I found his and Margarita's birth announcements in the Roman Catholic Church in Calais. So I do know that his family was Catholic. And then he was my great-great-grandfather. So my great-great-grandmother was also very Catholic. Had her rosary around when we were kids and that kind of thing. She didn't practice a lot. She didn't go to church very often when I was a child. But I know that's a belief of that part of the family. Again, I have been able to talk to some of my older relatives. I talked to my great-great-aunt Virginia a few years ago, right before she passed, and was able to glean some information from her about the way he treated the family. He always promised her that he would dance at her wedding. I've talked to some of my great aunts and uncles on the second half of the family, who have said things like Charlotte was French, but the older family or Umberto was Italian, and so Charlotte actually would, when she would cook family dinners, she would try to incorporate both. So we have some recipes where both of the nationalities are incorporated. I'm sorry, I just realized y'all couldn't see that. So to learn a lot of these basics, these are also some really great examples of creative nonfiction and historical nonfiction. I absolutely love this Dear America series because it's written in journal form, so it's very day-to-day life activities. I use this one in particular, Hear My Sorrow. She's an Italian immigrant into New York, which is exactly what Umberto did. He immigrated right into Ellis Island and lived in New York for a few years before joining the military and going to Michigan. So these are really helpful to find information just of things that happened at the time. You can look up records through the courthouse, records through churches, anything that was around about the same time. So we're talking 1940 or 1920s era. Okay, sorry, technical difficulties, keeps popping up and telling me things. This is another one. This is the Dear America is the girls. My Name is America is the boys. So these have a couple more like soldier stories. And then this one is one of my favorites, Hand Me Down. She does a really great job with this creative nonfiction. This is her life story. Now the ending is a little different according to the author than the way life really went, but I loved this book. It was very, very awesome. Let's see, what's next on the worksheet? So a lot of the worksheet, like I said, you don't have to fill out everything on the worksheet when it comes to each of the different family members. It's good to get as much information as possible just because you are writing about them and you want to know everything about your character. It's the same if you're world building for a fantasy story. You want to flesh everything out and get as much information as possible. Unfortunately, like in my situation, I don't have family journals and things. I have a couple recipe books. I have a couple military records. I've been able to do a lot of genealogy and do census records and that kind of thing. So that gives me a little bit of the bare bones. But a lot of the personality you have to glean from stories in the family or things like that. So you're not going to be able to fill out everything on the worksheet unless you knew them in person. Or you happen to have something like a journal or something that they kept that I really wish I had. Now for some fun stuff. So when I began my journey in 2016, there was a huge push for genealogy records on Family Search and Ancestry, and I found Umberto's birth certificate. Now, for forever, he always told us that he was born in Naples, which is not true. He was born in Colle, which is about 3 hours east of Naples. So I decided I was going to Colle. So I flew out, spent a couple weeks in Rome, drove out to Colle for a few days, and this is actually Umberto's birth certificate, or what they had as birth certificates. It's where they tell the government, hey, I had a son, this is his name, this is the day he was born, and so he's like being counted as a citizen. And this is the actual book that my great-great-grandfather signed when Umberto was born. So this was really cool to get to see the handwriting from my grandparents and what the street they lived on in this little town. And the hand here actually belongs to the gentleman who owned the bed and breakfast I was staying at, who took me around town to help find this information. And when he got the address, the magistrate let us go upstairs to the map room. And when we got to the map room, we actually got to see a map from 1885 of this town on this hill in Colle. And so he drove me around town because some of the street names had changed. But the way that they were written in 1885 is they weren't street names. They were like sections of houses. So he drove me through the different sections until we found the right street. And so one of these two houses here was the house where Umberto was born. Just don't know which one exactly. And we didn't knock on the door to go in. So this is all I got to see. But it's up here in the mountain. And actually, they're still building in this mountain. They're going up even higher. So that's kind of cool to see all these different houses being put in. So then, after I got home from Italy, I found the 1910 census where it named all of Umberto's siblings. And a story in the family is that Rachelina, was actually blind and was not allowed to come into the U.S. through Ellis Island. But according to the 1910 census, she was marked as a seamstress and in the States, living in the States. So I don't know if they fudged the census and said she could see or how she made it across. But according to our family stories, it was said that she did not live in the States, which is very interesting. But so I went to New York, and when I got to New York, the apartment building that they lived in 1912 had been torn down, but this was the street they lived on, and I was able to find this photo here of old New York with the districts marked on it. And so they were in the King's District, which is somewhere here in the middle. I haven't looked at this in a while, I don't remember. But I was also able to go over to the library and pull up the tax documents for the apartment building they lived in. So this here is the apartment building they lived in when Umberto was in his young 17 to 20s, right when he left for the military. And this is where it would have stood today. So this is a photo I actually took of the same street, and if you look, this is the same building here. They just knocked down the apartment building, and there's actually a furniture store here now. But I was able to find the tax records, figure out how big the building was, get the photo, all this kind of information. So doing a little bit of research like this is super fun. I was in the library and I squealed, and everybody was like, are you okay? And I'm like, yep, I'm fine. I just found a picture and I'm excited because genealogy was like very exciting to me. But this gives me a little bit of an idea of like where he lived. So I walked further up the street here, and there's a park over to the side where he probably would have played baseball with his siblings and hung out. And then there's a church at the end of the street where they probably would have gone to church, and where his older sister was married to her husband, and then they actually lived down the hall in the same apartment complex. That's such a 2020 word. Same apartment building, because on the same 1910 census, I have her and her husband and their daughter living in another apartment down the hall from the rest of the family, so they stayed close. But that's kind of fun to get to see. Just with a little bit of information, I knew this address from the 1910 census, and then I was able to find the photos and go and see the park and the church and all that information. So it's really fun, like once you find one puzzle piece and just kind of go from there. But back to the beginning, you do have to treat your family members like characters at some points. If you don't know a lot about them, that's what you're doing, is you're digging up this information and you're building their character, so that way you can put them into the story. I'm still working on a lot of Umberto's story and where it's going to take me next, because like I said, when he joined the military, he went to Michigan, and that's where Mary, his first wife, is buried, as well as their youngest son, Albert. And then with the military, he traveled to Georgia, which is currently where most of my family is located now. And last year, I was actually able to go and see his grave, which is in North Carolina, and then his brother, who is in Georgia, and their mother, Vincenzina, who is also in Georgia. So I got to go visit their grave sites and do a little bit more research there. And then I'm trying to go a little further back in their history, but his father just disappears off the face of the planet. Like in 1912, he just disappears. So he was able to ferry each one of the children across the ocean from Naples to New York, because he played an instrument on the ship. And if you worked as a crewman, you got one free ticket and could bring a child or spouse with you. And so he brought over Umberto first, and because he was 17, and he kind of made him head of the household, said, here's the apartment, you're in charge. And then the next person he brought over was Margarita, because she was the oldest female. And then he would bring over a few of the other kids, and then he finally brought over Mama and the youngest. So there's about a 5-year gap between Umberto's immigration and then the rest of the family. Sorry. But then Vincent went on to cross a few more times, and then he just disappears. They believe that maybe he was buried at sea, but I'm not sure on which ship or where or that kind of thing. So I'm still doing a lot of research while I'm writing this story. And in this case, the story I'm writing is mine and Umberto's. So I'm doing my journey, finding his journey. Which is kind of fun because I know a lot about me as a character, and so I get to do character sheet on myself while also doing one for each of, my grandfather and my aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles and all this fun stuff. But yeah, so that's pretty much the gist of this little workshop, is just you have to treat some of these family members as characters, and you want to dig into them as much as possible. A lot of us as children don't want to know all the nitty-gritty about our parents or our ancestors when they're alive, because that's just gross and weird, and they're not human, they're my parents, when really they are human, and they have all these different facets and all these different sides, and you want to make sure you get all of them, especially when you're writing a story about them. And if you did know them, it's even nicer to have that first person view, or if you know somebody who did know them, that's really nice to be able to get some of the insight of their personality. Or as I learned yesterday, you find somebody who had the same job or worked with them or worked near them, and they can tell you a little bit more about like their characteristics at work, or what their job entailed and that kind of thing, and that tells you a little bit more about the character. But once you get all the information about the character, then it's easier to write the story once you put that like degree of separation between family member and character. It's a lot easier to write their story. So we have a couple more minutes? We have a lot of more minutes. Does anybody in here have any questions? I'm not seeing any pop up yet. I'll just hang out for a minute or two. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with me, guys. Uh-oh. Don't push the keyboard. So this has been a workshop on how to write the story with characters God gave you. Thanks for coming to the Right Women Book Fest. And there are many more activities today. And if you got a chance to go get your swag bag, they are amazing. But you can check out the Right Women Book Fest at their website, therightwomenbookfest.org, their Instagram, and their Facebook page. You can also check me out here on Instagram, or also my Facebook page, or my website. Definitely the website if you want to read any of my work or see any of my travels. I have a 5-part section of my Italian trip, and you can check that out at meganacellis.wordpress.com. Later today, one of my friends, Patty Ross, is going to be doing a women's poetry open mic from 3:30 to 5. Disclaimer, it may contain adult content and language, but that should be fun. Patty does a lot of poetry open mics, and they're a lot of fun. But I will let you go and get ready for the tea party that's right after this. For any other events and stuff for the day, just check out therightwomenbookfest.org, and you guys have a good afternoon.